Thank you, Chair and honorable members. In response to the matters that I have been asked to address this committee on, I would like to state as follows, that the company known as Tools for Humanity Corporation is, according to our findings, registered in the United States of America and is related to another entity which calls itself Tools for Humanity, which is registered in Germany. These two, therefore, which are at the center of the matter that this committee is inquiring on, are foreign companies. They are not registered in Kenya. Because if they were registered in Kenya, it would have implied that they would fall under the operations of the Companies Act of 2015 and the regulations that fall under it. We have also established that this company started their operations in Kenya in terms of data collection and processing. But according to the information that the government has, the company and their local associates were operating in Kenya in the guise of offering educational programs on cryptocurrency. The net effect of this position is that although the two companies are not registered in Kenya and therefore not under the Kenyan legal regulation or regulatory framework, they appear to have been operating in Kenya. Honorable Chair, on 31st July 2023, the government commenced investigations on this matter of collection of biometric data by way of scanning the iris of Kenyan citizens in exchange for 7,000 shillings or thereabouts worth of Worldcoin tokens. And from us in the security space, 3 days before the day we commenced investigations, there had been reports that an activity where Kenyans were being scanned was taking place in several areas. And it took us like 2 days to be able to piece together finding on whether or not this activity was proceeding within the law or not. Whether the company and the associates were previously carrying out the same activity was not brought to our attention. And that's why when those reports came out, we took the action which we took. So far, this is the status of the investigations, Honorable Chair and members. We have recorded approximately 26 statements from witnesses and persons of interest. 2, 48 electronic gadgets and Worldcoin operations assorted merchandise or equipments have been recovered or taken to our possession. 3, the orbs and electronic gadgets have been submitted to the Communications Authority and the Cyber Forensic Laboratory, and they are currently undergoing through forensic analysis. And the purpose of this analysis is to establish a number of things, including the exact number of the people of Kenya whose iris was scanned. Number 2, the exact nature of personal data that was captured, the capability of the equipment that was being used, the possible health implications of that process on the health of the people of Kenya who are involved, whether the authorizations that are required under the law to carry out an activity of this nature had been obtained, and eventually to establish whether crimes under the law of Kenya were committed, and if so, prosecute those that would be found culpable. In this process of investigations, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, I confirm that all the relevant government agencies are involved and are supporting the investigative process, including but not limited to the Central Bank of Kenya, the Communications Authority, the Office of the Data Protection Commission, the Registrar of Companies, the Capital Markets Authority, the Kenya Bureau of Standards, the Nuclear Power and Energy Agency, the Consumer Protection Agency, and also we are collaborating very well with the International Police Organization, Interpol, which is critical in terms of any need for extraterritorial jurisdiction on persons who may be of interest and they are outside the territory of the Republic of Kenya. Honorable Chair, I have been asked, and before I leave there, I just want to confirm, Chair, on the matter of investigations, that the government appreciates and acknowledges that this is a matter of grave public interest, and therefore the investigations will be expedited given the public interest nature of this matter. And I can confirm on behalf of government that any persons, whether private or public officials, whose action or inaction could have led to the commission of crimes against the people of Kenya of whatever nature will be prosecuted once the investigations are complete. And as I've said, we will expedite the process. And because the Director of Criminal Investigations appeared before this committee, that is all I wish to say about that particular matter for now. And in any case, Chair, I am careful so that we don't jeopardize or preempt or prejudice the ongoing investigations. Honorable Chair, I have also been asked to tell this committee whether there is a relationship between cryptocurrency and the crimes of money laundering and the financing of terror. In response, Honorable Chair, I would like to tell the committee that in the upfront, the answer is yes. It's in the affirmative. We believe there could be a correlation between cryptocurrency activities and possible misuse of that space to advance the offenses related to money laundering and the financing of terror. And by saying so, Chair, I'm not passing judgment on the legality of cryptocurrency trade. I will explain why we, as Government of Kenya, suspect that this area of cryptocurrency could expose the country to some degree to infiltration by money launderers and people who may want to finance terror. This is why. Honorable Chair, first, cryptocurrency is not a legal tender, and therefore it falls out, or rather it falls outside the regulatory framework and ambit of the Central Bank of Kenya. Money laundering and the financing of terror takes place within the financial services sector, involving the transfer of money, either to launder that money or to use that money to finance terror and other illegal activities, including the narcotics trade, or trade in narcotics, drugs, and psychotropic substances. Now, because cryptocurrency is not legal tender, and because cryptocurrency, as we speak, does not fall within the regulatory ambit of the Central Bank of Kenya, therefore, it is very difficult to oversight that space. It is a financial related activity, but falling outside the regulator, and the regulator of the financial space is principally the Central Bank of Kenya, of course, and other support institutions like the Capital Markets Authority. This gap, therefore, allows the transfer and trade of cryptocurrency without any regulatory checks. It encourages anonymity in financial transactions. You cannot trace, you cannot locate the owners and the dealers in the money or the finances that are involved in this space. And for that reason, it is possible, because of this space which is shrouded in anonymity and is not regulated, it is possible to process financial transactions across borders through online platforms. Money can move from one account to another account across borders without the regulatory oversight of the central bank, and still end up achieving activities or financing criminal activities like terrorism. The delicate and volatile nature of transactional data makes traceability of financial transactions in cryptocurrency difficult and derogates the efforts made by investigative agencies and the Asset Recovery Agency in tracing and recovering the proceeds of crime. In other words, Honorable Chair, because of anonymity and non-regulation in the online nature of the business and the ability to move financial assets, which are not legal tender, but they are financial assets, from one jurisdiction to another without detection, gives room for the movement of finances outside the legal framework, which can benefit criminal activity. And therefore, if you're investigating, it's very difficult to understand and put on, on the spot all the persons who are part of that transaction. Number two, the asset recovery agency is unable to trace the physical assets that can even be frozen. And I say so because the ability of government to trace assets and freeze them is an important tool in the fight against the financing of terror and the fight against money laundering. Because once there is a detection that the finances could be going towards the direction of terror or money laundering, there are some remedial measures both under the United Nations Security Council resolutions and our own anti-money laundering law and the regulations on the counter-terrorism financing to freeze those assets, those finances, and prevent them from reaching their destination. But in this space, it is almost impossible. And therefore, Chair, while I am not in a position to point at a direct link between cryptocurrency, money laundering, and counterterrorism, I can only say for sure the space and framework in which this activity of cryptocurrency operates is a plausible ground, is a possible area of money launderers and the financiers of terror to use and move assets across borders undetected, which end up hurting the country, and the government is left with no remedial measures because the assets cannot be traced, they cannot be frozen, and therefore the objectives of the financiers of terror and money launderers can be achieved using the cryptocurrency activity. That possibility is there. Thirdly, Honorable Chair, actually fourthly, and is perhaps the last one, I've been asked to discuss the legal and regulatory gaps on cyber security and cyber crime prevention. Honorable Chair, we have a legal framework that it has come to our attention that it has gaps. And I think this has not come to our attention just because of this particular matter of Worldcoin or even cryptocurrency. 3 months ago, the Interior Cabinet Secretary gazetted a task force to review the existing legal and policy framework on cyber security after it became apparent that the cyberspace is becoming the fourth frontier of our territorial exposure to national security threats. What I mean, traditionally, a country's exposure to security threats was limited to land, air, and sea. But now there is a fourth frontier of attack, and the nation can be attacked severely and perhaps even more disastrously, in a more disastrous manner from the cyberspace. And so we set up this task force. This task force had already covered a lot of ground and was supposed to expire and submit a report to the Cabinet Secretary on 17th of August this year. While that task force was about to complete its work, two things happened. One, the attempted attack on the e-citizen platform, which paralyzed and interfered with the activities in that platform for a day or two towards the end of July. Number two, Worldcoin. And those two developments led the ministry and the government to determine there is need to do more substantive work and include these new frontiers of cyber security threats. And for that reason, the task force period has been extended for another 3 months, and their recommendations will be able to help us tackle all the gaps in the law and policy around this area. But in the meantime, in a summary, Chair, the gaps at the moment are around the registration of companies. And entities that want to be data controllers or data processors under the Data Protection Act. The kind of documents that are supposed to be presented before a company or an entity is registered as a data controller or data processor, the issues around eligibility for issuance of certificates as a data controller or processor. We believe the law needs to clarify, amplify, and make it a bit rigorous. Not everybody should be able to collect data and control data for the same reason, as I have said. The same way the country's security today is being threatened beyond the three traditional areas of land, air, and sea, with now cyberspace coming on board. The same way, in a similar way, in a similar manner, data is becoming the gold of the future. What gold was to the economies of the 18th and 19th century is what data is going to be. Whoever controls and processes data is going to be holding into very valuable assets. So it should not be easy that anybody can come simply because they have an inducement and start processing the data of people and controlling that data. So the process of registering those who control data, those who process data, should be made more rigorous under our laws. Two, foreign companies seeking to become data controllers, data processors, the kind of documents and eligibility criteria should even be harsher. They should be harsher than the eligibility criteria of companies and entities of the people of Kenya. And the reasons are for reasons of national sovereignty. It is actually something we need to reflect on. And I know, Chair, I've had this discussion elsewhere in a different space. Data being what it is today, a crucial asset, a crucial tool that can be used not only for good purposes like commerce and business decisions, but data can be used to harm. So a foreign entity, a foreign company, or even a Kenyan company or entity which is associated or has allegiance to a foreign entity must be treated with a lot of rigor before they are allowed to process, retain, and control data of the people of Kenya. What worries me as the minister responsible for the security of our country in this particular matter was the kind of data that was being harvested. Because the iris, the scanning of iris, is one of the most intrusive data harvesting methods. There are other methods, but the scanning of the eyes is quite intrusive. It's deeply intrusive. Number two, experts say that the biological consequences of that intrusion, it could be disastrous. It could be life-threatening. So from where I sit, Chair and members, I think we should be very careful with allowing foreigners to access, control, process, and retain the data of the people of Kenya for the reasons I've given. Number three, the current law does not pronounce itself on circumstances when data controllers and or data processors give incentives to induce subjects to provide data and the punishment for inducement. In other words, should a data processor or controller use an inducement as a way of obtaining the consent of the person from whom data is harvested? And therefore, the question that in our investigations we would want to establish is, besides the gap being there, is whether the consent of the Kenyans that gave consent for their iris to be scanned was informed consent, voluntary consent, or it was consent obtained through inducement and undue influence. And the lawyer's chair will tell you that whether or not the consensual contracts were signed, the contracts of consent, any contracts obtained through either duress, inducement, or fraud, misrepresentation, all those contracts are avoidable and they can be rescinded and they can be avoided, etc., etc. In other words, Chair, it is not enough. First of all, we must ask ourselves as the people of Kenya that if I come and I'm processing or harvesting data, and instead of asking for that data and asking for the consent, I have some money in my pocket. And I tell the people of Kenya, I have some money here, but please, you must allow me to do this. Is that lawful? Is that even moral? Is it something that we should allow as a country? Next, the Act does not provide for specific proof to the Commission, the Data Commission, that to ascertain itself that the subjects of data collection were taken through the purpose. The people whose data is being collected. It is not clear, neither is the Commission obligated to ensure that the public in whose data is being collected is thoroughly made aware what the purpose of that data would be in the short term, in the mid-term, in the long term. Next, enforcement and issues around enforcement of this act on data protection needs to be enhanced. And now that the laws of Kenya are silent on cryptocurrency, which is currently one of the most popular financial tools for organized crime, based on the reports from other countries, other jurisdictions. We should ask ourselves whether cryptocurrency should continue to take place without regulation, without the CBK oversight, or we should recognize it and regulate it and move on. The gray situation we are in, our continuous maintenance of a middle ground is not helpful to the country, and it threatens both our security and our sovereignty as a country. Honorable Chair, as I have said, the Ministry of Interior has established the task force which has been established under the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act of 2018. And we are going to attach very, very detailed regulations on enforcement of, or further administration of that act. The drafts are ready, public participation is ready, and we are going to include these new challenges that we've gotten from the attack on the e-citizen platform and the Worldcoin issue to make sure that we take on board comprehensive reforms. Finally, Chair, the following are the recommended areas of intervention. One, there is need to consider and redraft criminal offenses. The criminal offenses section under the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act of 2018 to remove duplicated provisions, to limit the scope of the offenses, and to better specify the objective and subjective elements of the crime. In other words, that area of the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act of 2018 on offenses is scanty. We must develop two things there. One, we must expand the scope of the possible crimes which can be committed under this law on computer misuse and cyber crimes. Number two, we must also provide and develop what lawyers call elements of the crime. We must provide for both the objective and subjective elements that constitute the crime. That is the only way to capture everything. Because tomorrow, today is Worldcoin, tomorrow there will be another thing which is not covered in the law. And my experience tells me, beyond just criminalizing certain conducts, we need to go further and develop the elements of the crime in such broad terms that even in future, a new activity would easily fall under the expanded and elaborated section on crimes under this cyberspace. Number two, it may be possible for Parliament to actually take on this issue of cryptocurrency even in a separate act of Parliament. Okay, and just perhaps for a run for the rest of the world and how we need to handle this matter of cryptocurrency. The current law does not distinguish between serious and less serious types of harm, which is worrying for me from my legal background. It tends to treat, the current act tends to treat violation of computer or misuse of computers and cyber crimes like conduct which falls in the same hierarchy. I have already demonstrated, Chair, to this committee that even when it comes to violation of data privacy, depending on the methods used and the procedures used to harvest data, you can create a hierarchy of crimes because some of the conduct is more intrusive, it has more dangers and more risks on the victims, and therefore we require to have a hierarchy of crimes so that we distinguish between small crimes, medium crimes, and what we would call egregious crimes on this cyberspace. And penetrating, for example, somebody's eyes with electronic equipment, harvesting that data and storing it as huge biological and chemical consequences and health implications. And that's part of what our investigations should help us to establish. Finally, I think we need to establish the National Cybersecurity Agency under the Act. This agency should help us to regulate the cyber space and act as a bridge between industry and government, and provide a unified source of advice, guidance, and support for cybersecurity, including proper management of the cyber space. We need to amend the certain provisions of the National Intelligence Act number 28 of 2012 to address digital economic sabotage. Now that we've moved to e-commerce, e-government, e-services, we need to empower our National Intelligence Service Agency to be able to rein in on the cyberspace and be able to intercept activities and data in the cyberspace to avoid a situation of digital economic sabotage. We also need to amend other laws, including Access to Information Act of 2016, to incorporate strict parameters on extraction of information by digital internet-based companies. The Access to Information Act needs to be amended in that respect. And then also there is need, as I have said, to think whether time has not come for us to have a standalone Cryptocurrency Act of Kenya. Thank you, Honorable Chair.